Indie games aren't known for turning profits. Often being passion projects by small teams or solo developers, indies usually rely on niche audiences who favor innovative ideas and relatively low price tags over the blockbuster experience of AAA titles. That said, due to their often low budgets and tight-knit teams, sometimes even comprising of a similar developer, when an indie game strikes gold, it can turn those into mind-bending profits. Welcome to ZeroDeaths. Here are 10 times indie games managed to turn a huge profit. Number 1. Undertale. Let's start with the relatively unassuming indie hit, Undertale. Undertale was developed by Toby Fox over 32 months after an initial crowdfunding push that raised $51,000. Needless to say, the game became a huge hit after its release, with it, allegedly, being one of the best-selling games on Steam by the end of 2015, having sold 500,000 copies already. With those numbers continuing to climb over the last 5 years, it's hard to know exactly how much the game has grossed. But we do know that on Steam back in 2017, the game had sold around 2.7 million copies. At $10 a pop, that's already $27 million. Accounting for Steam's cut, the commission art for the game, and the game's popular merchandising and ports, Redditor Adam Anshin puts Fox's gross profits at somewhere in the ballpark of $14 million. Now, when you take a look at Undertale's low-bit aesthetic, janky music, and systems, you don't exactly see $14 million. But that's exactly where the magic of indie titles is, innovating and presenting an entirely novel experience. Number 2. Rust. Rust is a bizarre game in so many respects. It has an extremely dedicated fanbase, but remains slightly outside of the mainstream indie canon. But this may be attributed to its unique setup of being a multiplayer-only open-world survival sandbox. This setup is also what makes it so exciting, pitting players against each other, but also permitting them to cooperate, use proximity-based live speech, and build mighty forts to dominate a landscape, while, of course, fighting off starvation, hypothermia, and attacks from wildlife. Developed by Facepunch Studios, who masterminded Garry's Mod back in 2006, Rust entered early access in 2013 and received a full PC and Mac release in 2018, with console ports on the way. In 2017, it had reportedly sold 9 million copies, making $142 million, overtaking Garry's Mod as the studio's biggest cash cow. Number 3. Rocket League. Speeding onto the scene in 2015, Rocket League has been a sensation ever since, finding itself on most major platforms. Like the 2 previous games on the list, it definitely attracts an audience for its unique premise: rocket-powered cars playing soccer. Emerging from experiments Dave Hagewood, Psyonix's studio's founder, had done for Unreal Tournament 2003, Rocket League's predecessor, supersonic acrobatic rocket-powered battle cars, wasn't a smash hit. But to be honest, with a name that long and sounding like an edition of Hot Wheels, it's easy to see why. Rocket League built on the systems of the original release, making it sharper, graphically cleaner, and frankly, just a whole lot more fun. By the beginning of 2018, the game saw over 10 million sales and 40 million players, given the trend to play local co-op with up to 4 players. Psyonix also estimated that 80% of the game's players had purchased at least one of the game's DLC offerings, netting it a tidy sum estimated at over $110 million. This was, however, Psyonix's last indie release, with them being bought out by Epic Games in 2019. Number 4. Five Nights at Freddy's. Moving back to some solo releases, Five Nights at Freddy's is a huge cultural phenomenon, devised, designed, developed, and even published by one man, Scott Cawthon. The series exploded in popularity, spawning 7 main games to date, not including a number of spin-offs, novel adaptations, and plenty more on the way, including an elusive film adaptation. Originally released in 2014, the series generally sees you take control of a night security guard working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a family restaurant where animatronics move at night and kill anyone they see at night, stuffing them into a spare animatronic suit. It's dark, uncanny, and terrifying. Although the total gross of the franchise is still left up to interpretation, many place it somewhere between $25 and $100 million, meaning some serious profits for a solo developer who owns the IP. Number 5. Lemmings. Okay, this one takes us quite a way back to 1991, but it was most certainly one of the best-selling games of its generation. Dundee developers DMA Design masterminded the green-haired little charmers with countless spin-offs, remakes, and sequels, spawning over the 30 years which followed. But on its day of release, Lemmings sold 55,000 copies, which is an especially huge number considering that the world was a wholly different one, with significantly fewer home computers and less interest in gaming while relying on traditional distribution networks. But the fact that we still remember it today is a testament to its success. And when DMA Design released Grand Theft Auto in 1997, well, you know the rest. Number 6. Angry Birds. Love them or hate them, Angry Birds is most certainly a gaming phenomenon. It managed to target the huge audience for casual gamers, which spans all the way from young kids through all age groups. Developed by Rovio Entertainment in 2015, Angry Birds is the only mobile game on the list, but is undoubtedly one of the staples of money-grabbing mobile gaming, along with the likes of Candy Crush and many others that followed. Over the series, the developers employed an array of paid and freemium models to, again, be able to reach a phenomenally huge audience. In 2017, Rovio announced that Angry Birds, including all its related media and merchandise, had turned a gross revenue of $201 million. Needless to say, those angry little birds are going to be around for a long time yet. Number 7. Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight definitely hasn't turned the greatest profits on this list, but being a passion project who are devoted to their most loyal fans, which has managed to sell over 2 million copies, it's certainly one worth mentioning. With the original game greatly surpassing its crowdfunding goal of $311,502 in 2013, the first chapter of the game was released in mid-2014 to great fanfares. Not only that, but the developers kept building the game for the next half a decade, releasing 4 full expansions and spanning countless different platforms. Throughout the development of these expansions, the team reportedly went quite overboard, with development costs averaging around $1 million for each of the expansions. However, they kept their promises to their crowdfunders and built a strong relationship with their players in doing so, which undoubtedly helps them push out over 2 million sales. Number 8. Terraria. The 16-bit inspired 2D side-scrolling action-adventure sandbox Terraria has certainly been a phenomenon since its release in 2011, piggybacking on the popularity of a certain title, which we'll get to later. The game was developed by Indiana-based Relogic, initially releasing it for Windows PCs alone, but since has been ported to almost every modern console, handheld device, and mobile under the sun. As such, by April 2020, after countless iterations, improvements, and updates, the game had sold over 30 million copies. 1 month later, the developers released the final major update for the game, depressingly titled Journey's End. Despite its surge in popularity, major overhauls, and the hundreds of new items and enemies introduced since the game's release, Relogic insisted to keep the game at its original price of $9.99, a hugely respectable choice that makes us love them all the better. Number 9. Stardew Valley. 30 million copies is a hard number for indie games to top, but Stardew Valley's over 10 million sales is somewhat more impressive considering the entire game was devised and developed by one person alone, Eric Baroni. It found its start in 2011, with Baroni announcing the game using Steam's Greenlight system in 2012 to gauge interest. Needless to say, its merging of hugely popular formulas such as Animal Crossing, Rune Factory, and Terraria made it a hit. As a result, Baroni spent the next 4 years developing the project on his own before releasing the game to massive success and acclaim in 2016. But he didn't stop there. Taking on feedback, he patched bugs, added features, and organized countless ports to other platforms, making the game accessible to a vast audience, which is perfect given its casual nature. Not only that, but the game topped both the App Store and Nintendo Switch download charts, making more than $1 million in revenue in its first 3 weeks on the App Store. That would be a huge win for the lifetime of a passion project indie, but for Baroni's masterpiece, it is only a fraction of the game's phenomenal profits and impact. Number 10. Of course, we had to get to this title at some point. If Undertale's $14 million for a solo developer sounded like a lot, or Baroni's 10 million sales blew your socks off, you better strap yourself in. Solo developed by Marcus Notch Person, popular opinion suggests it is one of the most revolutionary, if not best, games of all time, but fact simply places it as the best-selling game of all time. Take that in for a moment. An indie game developed by one person is the best-selling game of all time. This is, of course, Minecraft. With the game's base program being completed over just 1 weekend, Minecraft went live to the public on the 17th of May 2009, and received update upon update until its full version released in 2011. At this point, Persson had set up Mojang Games and handed over much of the development to Jens Bergensen. Interestingly, although it received a whopping million purchases in less than a month after exiting beta in 2011, the game had never been commercially advertised, relying wholly on its reputation and word of mouth. By this point, the game had already grossed around $33 million. 9 years later, and countless ports, spin-offs, updates, and a change of hands, which we'll talk about in a moment, Minecraft reached over 200 million sales, while still averaging 126 million monthly players. If Persson had kept the original $10 price tag at this point, we'd already be looking at $2 billion. But the story goes on. Back in 2014, 3 years after its release, Microsoft purchased the IP for $2.5 billion, which went straight into the pockets of those who had developed the game. Since then, Microsoft has obviously produced a number of spin-offs and created a merchandising empire, meaning it has turned a far greater profit than the 200 million sales tell us alone. Our jaws still hit the floor every time we hear that an indie IP was purchased for the unimaginable sum of $2.5 billion. But, well, it happened. There were a ton of other games we wanted to include on this list, but many were hard to either justify as indies or have kept their sales data close to their chests. One such example is the Battle Royale instigator PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. Regardless, it's clear that indie game development isn't a dead end as it's often portrayed. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and, if it's anything to go by, we can see that the majority of the games on this list reach that light by shaking up the norms dictated by AAA titles, introducing new styles, mechanics, and ideas to gaming along the way. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so you'll never miss a new video. We selected this video for you to watch next.